Okay, so today we're going to talk about evolution, and there's a lot to talk about when we talk about evolution, natural selection, and all that good stuff. It's a huge, huge topic. So we'll kind of try and touch on a little bit here, a little bit there, uh, and we'll do some activities and kind of get to know a little bit more every day, a little bit about evolution. So first of all, I think most of us know that the theory of evolution was created through or by natural selection was first formulated by or first published in Charles Darwin's book on the origin of species. And as most of you know, it was kind of controversial at the time. Some people would say it was pretty controversial. um, and actually, Charles Darwin held on to this idea for a while before publishing it. He kind of went back and forth, didn't know if he wanted to publish it or not. And then someone else came up with a similar idea and was about to publish it. And then he went and published it ahead of that person so he could at least get the credit. He kind of, you know, pushed himself to do it, got up the courage to do it because it was a pretty controversial topic of the time, and it still is today, a very controversial topic. Um, when in my opinion, it shouldn't necessarily be a controversial topic because it is based in science, it's based in evidence, and whether you believe it's true or not, that's up to you. However, the science and the facts and the information that we've gathered have all pointed to evolution as being correct. If you believe something else, that's just not scientific. Okay. Evolution basically is the change in heritable characteristics of biological populations over successive generations. Um, this is the Wikipedia definition here. These characteristics are the expressions of genes that are passed from one parent to offspring during reproduction. It's basically as species, as they reproduce, go from one generation to the next, their genetic makeup is slightly changing. And there's a lot of factors that create those changes. In sexual reproduction, it's the mixing of genes which causes most of the changes. However, mutations, mistakes in the coding of DNA, those things can all create changes in your heritable characteristics or traits that you can pass down from one generation to the next. Okay. Um, let's start off here just talking about a couple of definitions before we get in here. So, a population is the number of organisms of the same species that live in a particular geographic area at the same time that are capable of interbreeding. Okay, so any population, when you talk about a population, they are in contact with another, they can breed if they want to, and they can pass their genes on to one another. Okay. Um, now, populations, usually when we talk about a population, we're talking about all the organisms in an area. However, if you want to be more specific, we talk about species. So a species is a group of organisms that share a genetic heritage. So they have similar genes. How similar? Well, that's kind of up for debate. One of the last things here on the bottom here, it says scientists have changed their definition of species several times throughout history based on looking at the DNA, based on looking at the genes, based on looking at, it's just like a constant argument whether these two animals are the same species or not. But some of the characteristics, they should be able to interbreed, so they should be able to breed with one another. They should be able to create offspring that are also fertile. I know like lions and tigers, they can breed, but their offspring is not necessarily fertile. So yeah, so it doesn't really count, I guess, in that instance. And then different species are also separated from each other by, they can be separated through reproductive barriers, and there's a couple different ones. The two most common here are going to be the geographical, such as mountain ranges separating two populations. So there could be two of a similar species, but they're separated by a mountain or a river or an ocean, so they can't breed with one another. Okay. There's also genetic barriers, so for whatever reason they cannot mate with one another. They don't have the same number of chromosomes. They don't have similar reproductive organs. Okay, so they can't breed with one another. Okay. Now there's actually 4 essential components to natural selection. Okay. The first one is variation. So 4 things that need to be true and are true in order for natural selection to occur. Natural selection is the process by which, selection is the process by which evolution occurs. But variation, so all forms of life, they have to vary genetically, and they do. Variations can be natural, or they can be caused by mutations or mistakes in copying DNA. Just any variations in the genetic code. So we may have, like every human has similar genes. Our genes are all similar, but they're not exactly the same. There are slight variations in those genes. Okay, without those variations, then evolution wouldn't occur. Okay, there would be no difference. Everything would be the same. Nothing would change over time. Okay. The next essential component is inheritance. Okay. Certain traits and genes are inherited from parent to child, right? So the 2 parents come together, they mix their genes, and they give a combination of those genes to the subsequent generation. Okay. So we have to be able to inherit genes from one generation to the next in order for evolution to occur. The next one is selection. So organisms with traits that are favorable to the survival and reproduction are more likely to pass on those genes. Okay. So we can either have artificial selection, so like breeding, like when people breed dogs. So people breed dogs for specific traits. Or we can have natural selection, where the environment chooses which traits will continue through survival of the fittest. Now, in reality, the best genes don't always get passed on. So it's not always survival of the fittest, it's survival of the survivors. Whoever survives for whatever reason. Could be luck, could be because of their genes, but just survival ensures that those genes will be passed on to the next generation. Okay. And then the last one, time. Evolutionary change happens in a few generations, but major changes like speciation or creation of new species often takes thousands and thousands of generations. Okay, so slight changes in our genetic code or genetic makeup can occur within a few generations, even one generation, if there is a mutation in a gene or for some reason the DNA changes. It can happen rather quickly. But if you want to go from a early hominid all the way to a human, it takes a very, very long time. For example, humans developed over about 6 million years. So the first hominids are basically creatures that stood on 2 legs and had similar characteristics to us. Were seen in the fossil record about 6 million years ago, but took us about 6 million years to get to where we are today. Okay. Other organisms can evolve much faster, okay, but usually large organisms take a lot longer to develop. Okay. Now, really, there's 2 types of reproduction, sexual and asexual. And sexual reproduction involves mixing of traits between 2 partners. So populations here tend to have more variation. These new variations arise from mutations. They can arise from mutations as well. Each subsequent generation produces new genetic variation in offspring. The species can adapt to new environments due to variation, as long as they have a survival advantage. Okay. One of the advantages to sexual reproduction is a disease is less likely to affect all the individuals in the population because they have a variety of different genes. Okay, they're not all the same. They all have differences. Okay, so some people are, if you think about humans, some people, they get a disease and their body takes care of it rather quickly, and other people really struggle with it. Right, so everyone deals with diseases differently, and that leads to a survival advantage. Okay, the disadvantages of sexual reproduction, well, it takes time and energy to find a mate. Okay, it's also not possible for isolated individuals to reproduce, so we can't have individuals reproducing. Asexual reproduction. Asexual is when one parent makes an exact copy of itself. The differences in DNA arise solely from mutation or mistakes when copying the DNA. And if you don't know, DNA is what gives us our characteristics, what tells the body what to do. Basically, it's the kind of the software, or I guess kind of the software tells our body what to do. Asexual reproduction, it happens very, very quickly. So many generations can be created in a short period of time. So it takes between 12 minutes and 24 hours to create one new generation, whereas humans take 22 to 32 years about on average. Okay. So in 32 years, that's so many generations, thousands and thousands of generations of an asexual reproducing organism. Drug-resistant bacteria. So bacteria that have drug resistance, they can evolve rather quickly. And this kind of picture shows it down here. So here's a bunch of bacteria. All these purple ones, those are normal. And then there's one orange one that is resistant to a specific antibacteria drug. So basically an antibiotic. I don't know why I thought antibiotic. This one that's resistant to the bacteria, it survives, and then it can reproduce, and it reproduces very, very quickly. So those bacteria then make up the larger part of this population, and the drugs no longer work. Okay, so there's actually a lot of antibiotics that doctors won't prescribe until it's extremely dire, right? So if you get a bacterial infection, maybe you'll get some amoxicillin or you get penicillin or something like that. Those are pretty common antibiotics. But then if you get antibiotics but they don't work, then you go to a hospital and they'll give you some stronger stuff, some stuff that they don't usually give out to people because they don't want to create too many antibiotic resistant bacteria that resist every antibiotic out there. Okay, and then we wouldn't survive. The disadvantages to asexual reproduction, you're not going to have a lot of genetic variability. So the populations are vulnerable to extinction. So basically, like, you get sick with the bacteria and then the antibiotics come in and kill all of the bacteria and they die off, right? So they can't really survive because of their lack of genetic variability. Okay. Let's talk about some misconceptions and some evolution facts here. Evolution is not just simply change over time, like leaves changing color, mountains eroding, rivers shifting. Those are not examples of evolution. Evolution requires change in inheritable traits, and it's between generations. Okay, generations and generations of organisms need to reproduce in order for evolution to occur. Okay, so evolution occurs over a longer period of time. When we talk about evolution, most of the time we're not talking about the origin of life. Okay, evolution is not, that's not the, I know, like, Charles Darwin, his book was called Origins of Life. However, that's not really the main focus of evolution. Okay, so it does encompass this idea of the origin of life, but most evolutionary biologists are looking at how life changed after its origin. Okay, and one of the most important parts about studying as evolution, studying anything in science, is being able to take what you know and use it to solve problems. Okay, so we know that things change over time. We know that bacteria change over time, viruses change over time, humans change over time. We know that certain genetic traits are advantageous to survival. So we study those kinds of things to better understand our world and to create medicines, to understand how our body works, to understand what traits and genes are beneficial to our own survival. Okay, we're going to look at some different articles about this. We're going to look at how whales somehow really don't get cancer, like, ever. It's very, very rare for whales to get cancer. And such a huge animal, you would think that they would get cancer more than humans, but they don't. And by studying their genes and by studying how they've evolved over the years, we can see and we can understand how they fight off cancer, and we can better fight cancer in humans. And that's really the main focus of evolution, is, how have things changed over time to make them better suited to survive. And that's really the main focus of evolution. One of the weird things is that evolution does not always result in progress. Okay, sometimes evolution can produce organisms that are not as fit to survive. Now, really, it's just they're not going to produce organisms perfectly suited to their environment. It allows survival of individuals with range of traits. They create individuals that are good enough to survive. So it's not necessary that organisms need to evolve to survive. Crocodiles, alligators, they've been the same way for millions of years. Their genes have changed very, very little over millions of years. Okay, they've been able to survive just because they're just already adapted pretty well to their environment. Okay, there's a lot of organisms like that out there. Okay, and then of course our environment is always changing. Climate change, rivers shift course, new competitors come in, predators come in, and organisms with traits that are beneficial in one situation may not be equipped well for survival in the new environment, the new changed environment. Okay. Again, evolution is not about necessarily getting better, right? It's more like it says here, it's not a progressive ladder where Homo sapiens are at the top. Instead, it's more like a tree where everything kind of branches off one another, and some of the branches die, and we get new branches. It's not a progressive ladder. It's, just everything changes over time. One of the common misconceptions here, and it's one of the key indicators, if you don't understand evolution, then this is like one of the things that, clearly indicate that someone doesn't understand evolution. Individuals cannot evolve. Okay, your DNA can actually change. It can change slightly. If you get a bone marrow transplant, now your red blood cells will have different DNA from your original red blood cells. We can do gene therapy or CRISPR treatments where we can change some of our DNA. Okay, but this is not really evolution, and this is not really what we're talking about when we're talking about evolution. Okay, sorry. Now, so evolution cannot occur in one generation. It occurs over generations. So like you think Pokemon, one individual, it evolves into the next, into the next, into the next. That's not how evolution works. So individuals cannot evolve. Evolution doesn't always occur slowly. Now, generally it does occur slowly, but it also can occur rapidly, especially when we have like mass extinction events or mass huge events that affect the entire world. So slow and steady evolution from going sea-dwelling creatures all the way up to the mammals that we have today that live on land. That happened over millions and millions of years. But sometimes it happens rather quickly. So in the past 50 years, we've seen squirrels evolve new breeding times in response to climate change. A fish species evolved resistance to toxins dumped in the Hudson River. And then a host of bacteria evolved resistance to new drugs that we develop. So many different factors can create this rapid evolution, like a small population size, a short generation time. So basically a short breeding time, so bacteria double in 12 to 24 hours, right? Also big shifts in environmental conditions, so climate change. So again, evolution usually occurs slowly, but it doesn't always, but it does have to happen between generations. It can't just happen in one generation. Okay. And that's where we're going to end now. There's a lot more to talk about, but we'll continue another day.